My name is Natalie Rowe. I'm 34. And the last time I knocked on my parents' door, I wasn't carrying a birthday cake or a suitcase or even pride. I was holding my daughter. Her name is June. She had just turned 7 months old, and I had nowhere else to go. The final line of code I committed was at 4:43 p.m. It was a patch, nothing fancy. A fix for a payment bug that only triggered when users added special characters in the address field. A quiet little function to stop things from crashing. I remember because it was the last thing I did before my life completely logged out. It was one of those Austin afternoons where the heat doesn't feel like weather, it feels like a warning. 99 degrees. My shirt stuck to my back. June whimpered in my arms. Her skin was warm, her little fists curled into my collarbone like she knew. I stood at the front door of the house I grew up in. A familiar oak frame, still chipped from the time my brother crashed his bike into it. The same doormat. The same wind chime. But this time, I wasn't welcome. I saw her silhouette through the curtain. My mother, I knew that stance. Straight spine, tilted head. But she didn't open the door, not even to look at me. Instead, my father stepped out. Still in slacks and rolled-up sleeves. Still looking like a man in control of every meeting, every line item, every version of life. Except me, he didn't say my name. Just glanced at June, then back at the space above my head. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "This is who we are." I swallowed hard. "Dad," I whispered. "Please, just one night. She hasn't eaten. We're tired. I just need a place until morning." And that's when my mother's voice cut through the frame. Clear, cold, perfectly pronounced. "We don't accommodate failure, Natalie. Not in this family." Then the door closed, not slammed, just closed, like they were logging off from me. Like I'd become a corrupted file they didn't want to risk reinstalling. June cried, soft, scratchy, like her little voice wasn't sure if it was allowed to be upset. I sat on the porch step, laid her across my lap. My hands were trembling, maybe from the heat, maybe from the knowing. I had survived pregnancy during a product launch. I had coded with one hand while holding a bottle in the other. I had pushed through midnight meetings with 102-degree fevers. But nothing, not one system crash, not one database failure, had prepared me for the quiet rejection of standing in front of your childhood home and realizing you're not in the family anymore. My phone was dying, 3% left. I opened Slack, scrolled, stopped at one name, Camila Vargas, a former back-end engineer, smart, still, unshakably kind. I typed, "I need help, I have nowhere to go." And waited. Camilla arrived in 32 minutes. Not an hour, not when I get the chance. 32 minutes, she didn't call. She didn't ask follow-up questions. She just showed up. In her old blue Subaru, the one with the faded bumper sticker that says, "Trust the process." The tires crunched against the gravel as she pulled up to the curb. Her window rolled down halfway, and I heard the engine hum, soft and steady like her voice always was. She stepped out wearing an oversized hoodie and jeans. No makeup. Hair in a low bun. Same Camilla. She grabbed a blanket from the passenger seat and jogged across the sidewalk. When she saw us, she froze for a half second. Just enough time to take it all in. Then she said, "Oh, Nat. That's all. Not what happened. Not why are you here. Just oh, Nat." She wrapped the blanket around my shoulders first, then gently reached for June, who had fallen asleep on my chest, exhausted from heat and hunger. Camilla held her like she'd done it 100 times. I tried to speak, but my throat was dust. Instead, I just nodded. Camilla didn't push. She just opened the back door of her car and motioned for me to follow. The air conditioning inside felt like a miracle. June stirred a little when the cold hit her cheeks, but didn't cry. She just curled deeper into Camilla's arms. I buckled in, stared out the window, and whispered. They wouldn't let me in. They looked at me like I broke something they couldn't fix. Camilla didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on the road as she pulled away. But her hand reached across the center console and rested briefly on mine. Not long, not dramatic. Just enough. Her apartment was small, probably 700 square feet at most. One bedroom, one bathroom, and a tiny balcony facing a back alley lined with recycling bins. But that night, it felt like a fortress. She flicked on the hallway light. It buzzed, then settled into a warm yellow glow. The place smelled like vanilla and old textbooks. Her cat, Romy, a grumpy three-legged tabby, stared at us from the couch and blinked like we were interrupting his nap schedule. Camilla tossed me a clean towel from the hallway closet. "Go shower," she said, already digging through her drawers. "I'll find something dry for June." I stared at her, at the way she moved with such quiet purpose, at how she'd already set a pot of water on the stove, because she knew I didn't eat unless reminded, at how she didn't flinch from the mess I'd become. I stood there, still holding my baby girl, still clutching the blanket. "Why are you being so kind?" I asked. It came out quieter than I meant. Camilla turned, met my eyes, and said, "Because someone should have been, long before this." In the bathroom, I stood under the hot water and let it burn the grime, the sweat, the shame off my skin. I cried, not loud, not desperate, just long, like the water was trying to wash something deeper than dirt. When I stepped out, there was a cup of chamomile tea waiting on the sink. A sticky note taped to the mirror, "One step at a time. You're not code to be fixed. You're a person to be held." See, the apartment was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty. Just paused, like the world had finally taken its hands off my shoulders. I stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in the towel Camilla gave me. My skin was flushed, my eyes red, my hair damp. But for the first time in days, I felt clean. Not just physically, but like the noise in my head had been rinsed down the drain. Camilla had changed June into a soft yellow onesie with faded giraffes on it. It was too big, sleeves rolled twice. But she looked peaceful again. Her cheeks were pink from warmth, not crying. They were on the couch, Camilla with June tucked into the crook of her arm, her phone resting face down on the armrest. She looked up when I walked in and smiled, not wide, not pitying, just soft. "I made you the tea," she said, nodding to the cup on the table. "And I put together a sleep spot for you." She gestured to the corner of the living room. 2 couch cushions, a clean blanket, and a throw pillow stacked neatly. Next to it, a laundry basket lined with towels. June's crib for the night. My chest clenched, not from grief, from grace. Because no one had prepared space for me in months. Not physically, not emotionally. I'd been squeezing myself into corners, apologizing for taking up air. Here, someone had made room. I walked over, sat down on the cushion, held the tea in both hands like it might slip through if I didn't grip tight enough. "Thank you," I whispered. My voice cracked. Camilla didn't answer. She just sat beside me, still holding June, her thumb gently brushing over my daughter's tiny palm. We didn't talk much, just sat. The kitchen light buzzed softly. The AC rattled like it always did in Texas apartments. Romy, the cat, jumped onto the windowsill and stared out like he was on night watch. I finally laid down around midnight. June stirred once, fussed, then fell back asleep to the rhythm of my breath. Camilla slipped into her bedroom, left the door cracked. I could hear the gentle rustling of her quilt, the hum of her phone being plugged in. I stared at the ceiling. There were no glow-in-the-dark stars, no posters, just white paint and a water stain in the shape of a leaf, but I could breathe here, and that was enough. At some point, I must have dozed off. But before I did, I thought about all the places I'd slept since leaving Brandon. Guest rooms that came with conditions, couches that came with judgment, motels with mold-stained carpet, and someone yelling through the wall. But tonight, there was a baby breathing quietly beside me, and there was a woman across the hall who had once memorized my coffee order, and now somehow still remembered my soul. I don't know how long I'll stay. I don't know what comes next, but I know what I didn't feel tonight. I didn't feel like a burden. I didn't feel like a warning sign. I didn't feel like failure code waiting to be rewrit. I just felt like a mom in a room with a little peace, and for now, that's enough. The next morning, the apartment was quiet, but not in the way that made you feel forgot. It was the kind of quiet that asked nothing from you, the kind that lets you just be. Camilla had already left for work. Her nurse scrubs were folded over the back of the kitchen chair. A to-go cup of black coffee half drunk on the counter. She'd left a sticky note on the fridge. "You've got this. Oatmeal's in the cupboard. Wi-Fi. Still surviving 24. I see." I laughed under my breath, a real laugh, the first one in, I don't know how long. June was still sleeping, her little body curved like a comma in the basket turned crib. Soft breaths escaping through parted lips. I didn't want to move, didn't want to risk waking her, didn't want to start the list of things I couldn't fix. So instead, I pulled out the old leather notebook Camilla had left on the coffee table. It had a few pages already marked with sticky tabs and tiny quotes scribbled in pencil. One of them read, "We write not to be understood, but to understand." And I think that was the first time I admitted I didn't understand myself anymore. So I opened to the first blank page. I didn't overthink it, didn't outline or plan or try to make it poetic. I just wrote. I stood on the porch, baby in arms, and heard my mother close a door she used to open with a smile. And I didn't break, but I did shift. I kept writing, messy, quick, like the words had been waiting behind my teeth for months and finally found a pen. I wrote about June's soft cry in the heat, about the way my father's eyes never met mine, about the shame of not having a single key to anywhere I belonged. I wrote for hours, until my wrist ached and the lines began to blur, and the world outside the window started to look a little less like a threat and a little more like background noise. When Camilla came home that evening, she paused at the door. She looked around, saw the cleaned-up kitchen, the fresh coffee made, the laundry sorted. She didn't mention it, just smiled and said, "June has been busy." I nodded, setting the notebook down. She slept, I wrote. It felt strange. Camilla handed me a grocery bag. Formula, diapers, frozen veggies, stuff I hadn't dared to ask for. "I hope it's okay," she said, almost too casually. "I just figured, if you're going to write about starting over, you'll need fuel." That night, after June went down, I picked up the notebook again, but before writing anything new, I flipped back to the first page and added something at the top. Syntax unknown, notes from the quiet reboot. It wasn't a blog, not yet, not a memoir, not a cry for help, just a soft return to the part of me that once believed. Her words mattered. 3 nights later, I fell asleep on the couch, notebook still open beside me. Pen slipped from my hand. June nestled in her basket, arms stretched overhead like she was claiming space she hadn't been given before. Camilla came home from her shift after midnight. She moved quietly, like she always did. Her kindness never announced itself. It just arrived and made room. She saw the notebook, read the first few lines. She didn't ask permission, but she didn't betray trust either. She just opened her old laptop, logged into a WordPress account she hadn't touched since nursing school, and titled the first post, "Syntax Unknown, a Porch, a Baby, and the Day Everything Logged Off." She left the author's name as NR. No photos, no bio, just the story, raw, unedited, and real. Then she hit publish. I woke the next morning to the sound of the coffee grinder, Camilla's weekend ritual. I rubbed my eyes, reached for the notebook, and froze, because next to it was her laptop open, and on the screen, "Your post has 2,417 views, 39 comments, 17 shares." I sat up slowly. Read the words, my words, under a title I hadn't given permission for, but also didn't regret. Camilla looked up from the kitchen. "Before you panic," she said, lifting both hands in defense. "People needed to read it." I just gave it legs. I stared at her. Part of me wanted to yell, to take it down, to retreat, but another part, the part that had been shut out on a porch, the part that slept on borrowed cushions, the part that hadn't been called by her name in months, that part was finally seen. I clicked open the first few comments. I've never read something that felt like my own memory. "I thought I was crazy for crying on a stranger's porch last year. You helped me breathe again." My mother slammed the door on me when I told her I was pregnant. This gave me language for something I never said out loud. I covered my mouth with both hands, not to cry, but to contain the shock of being heard, of being echoed. I whispered, "This wasn't supposed to be a blog." Camilla sat beside me, handed me a mug of coffee. Maybe not, but it was always meant to be read. Later that day, the blog hit 10,000 views, and then 25,000. It made its way into a subreddit for women in tech. A parenting forum reposted it. Someone translated it into Spanish. It didn't go viral like memes do. It spread. Like memory, like recognition. Like women nodding at each other across the silence. That night, I tucked June into her makeshift crib, sat by the window and looked out at the alley beyond the fire escape. I opened the notebook, turned to the second page, and wrote, "Apparently, truth has better reach than Wi-Fi." The letter came in a plain white envelope, tucked under the apartment door, no return address. But I didn't need one. I knew that font, the spacing, the sharp little flourish on every capital R. My mother's signatures were always tidy, even when she was being cruel. Camilla found it first. She didn't open it. She just handed it to me and said, "If you want me to burn it, I'll do it with joy." I didn't laugh. I peeled the envelope open with shaking fingers. 2 pages, neatly typed, emotionless, professional. And yet, every word burned. "Natalie, we are aware of the blog post that has been circulating online under your initials. It is clear you are attempting to portray this family in a negative light for personal gain. Your reckless choice to publish misleading, defamatory content has caused embarrassment to us and to the church community that has supported you for years. If this material is not removed immediately, we will pursue legal action for slander, emotional distress, and character defamation." There was no warmth, no concern for June, no mention of what it felt like to leave your daughter in the heat, with a baby in her arms, just legal threats. Dressed in civility, control wrapped in formatting, my hands shook. The paper rattled in my lap. Camilla sat across from me, arms folded tight, watching like a firewall ready to trigger. "They really sent this," I whispered. "They really don't know who they're dealing with," she muttered. 2 days later, it got worse. A formal letter arrived, this time from an actual attorney. A cease and desist order, alleging slander, reputational harm, and unfounded allegations that compromise moral standing. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. The performance of dignity, the obsession with appearance. My mother once made me change clothes because my sweater had a wrinkle, and what would the neighbors say? Now they were worried about what the internet would say. Camilla called her cousin, an entertainment lawyer in Dallas. He read the blog, then the letter, and said one thing: "They don't have a case. You didn't name them. You didn't lie. And the First Amendment is real." Still, the threat lingered. Not legally, emotionally. They didn't want to take down my blog. They wanted to take down my voice, to make me doubt the thing that had saved me from disappearing entirely. I sat on the fire escape that night, June asleep beside me inside, and stared at the sky like it might have a verdict to offer. I whispered into the dark, "I didn't mean for this to happen." And I swear, somewhere in the back of my head, I heard my own voice answer, "No, but you meant every word you wrote." And that's what mattered. The next morning, I opened the blog dashboard and posted a new entry, title, "When telling the truth offends the ones who hid it." The first line read, "They didn't mind what I lived through, only that I told someone else." The courthouse wasn't grand. No marble pillars, no stained glass, just linoleum floors and a faint smell of burnt coffee. But my knees still shook when I walked in. I never imagined I'd be here. Not because I broke the law, but because I told the truth. And the people who raised me didn't like what it sounded like outside their walls. Camilla came with me. She didn't wear anything dramatic, just jeans, sneakers, and a navy blazer I'd never seen her wear before. She sat beside me in the waiting room, hand on my back like a grounding wire. "You don't owe anyone apology for surviving," she whispered, "least of all them." The case was simple, at least on paper. Their lawyer argued I had intentionally inflicted emotional harm through misrepresentation of private family matters, resulting in reputational damage. They printed out my blog posts, highlighted sentences, zoomed in on screenshots, read them out loud as if truth was something you could cross-examine. Our defense was quiet, patient. We didn't posture, we didn't shout, we presented what was real. Photos of me on the porch, taken by Camilla the night she picked me up. Text messages I had sent to my mother, begging to come in. Voice recordings, one in particular. I had left my mom a voicemail the day after she closed the door. Asked her why, she never called back, but she texted, and I still had the message. We can't be associated with failure. That's not who we are. The judge read it twice, then looked at me and asked, "Is this the family you were born into?" I nodded. "Then this blog isn't defamation," she said. "It's documentation." The verdict came in under an hour. Case dismissed. No damages, no gag order, no apology either. But I hadn't expected one. When the judge stood to leave, Camilla reached over and grabbed my hand. I didn't squeeze, I just held on because I wasn't shaking anymore. Outside the courthouse, the sky was overcast. Not raining, not sunny, just still. The wind caught my cardigan like a flag. And for the first time in a long time, I let it. My parents didn't look at me when they left, didn't speak, didn't flinch, but I looked at them. And for the first time, I saw them for who they really were. Not villains, not monsters, just people so obsessed with perfection, they cut their own daughter from the frame. To keep the picture clean. Back at the apartment, I sat on the couch with June asleep against my chest. Camilla made tea. Neither of us spoke for a while, then she sat beside me and said, "You won." I shook my head. "No, I didn't lose, that's enough." That night, I posted one sentence to the blog. When someone tries to sue you for telling the truth, they're not protecting their name. They're protecting their silence. It started with a message request from someone named Aunt Clara. I hadn't seen that name in years. My mother's younger sister. She was always the quiet one, sat near the punch bowl at family gatherings, never said much. She never defended me, but she never condemned me either. Her message simply read, "Natalie, I read your blog, I believe you. I'm sorry I didn't say anything back then, but I'm proud of you now." I stared at the screen. Let the words sink in like sunlight into cold skin. Then came more, emails, DMs, voicemails from women I didn't know. And yet somehow did. I was that girl on the porch once. I hid in a hotel room the night I told my parents I was divorced. Your story made me call my daughter today. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. I told her I was wrong. Some messages came from men. I walked away from my family because they refused to see me as anything but shame. Thank you for naming it. And others from strangers, who weren't strangers anymore. One afternoon, Camilla and I took June for a walk in the park. The sun was out, filtering through the trees in golden slants. We passed a woman on a bench reading on her phone. She glanced up, blinked, then approached. Tentative, careful. "Are you NR?" she asked, holding her phone up slightly. It was open to my blog. I hesitated. Camilla stepped closer. I nodded slowly. The woman's eyes glistened. She said, "My daughter left an abusive marriage last year. I told her she was embarrassing the family. But after reading your story, I called her, I apologized, thank you." She hugged me, a stranger, but not really, because when truth ripples, it doesn't just reach the people you write for. It reaches the people you thought were too far gone. A few weeks later, a small indie publisher reached out. They'd been following the blog. They didn't ask me to glam it up, didn't want it viral. They just wanted to preserve it. It's the kind of book women keep in drawers, pass to friends, read at 2 a.m. when they can't sleep. Camilla was in the kitchen when I told her. She didn't shout or cheer, she just smiled. "Told you," she said. "You weren't writing to be read, you were writing to be remembered." When the contract arrived, I signed it during nap time. June curled against my hip, drooling on the sleeve of my sweater. The title, left in the syntax. The dedication, to the ones left on porches. May you always find the strength to knock on your own door. That night, I lit a candle, sat on the balcony, and watched June sleep through the glass door. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt anchored, finally. Because I didn't just survive what they did to me, we didn't move far. Just across the river, into a tiny white bungalow with chipped paint, a crooked mailbox, and a door that stuck when it rained. But it was ours, not borrowed, not tolerated, not temporary. Ours. The living room smelled like old cedar and fresh paper. The kitchen windows faced east. Every morning, the light poured in like it had been waiting for us. There was no nursery, not yet. Just a corner of the bedroom with a hand-painted crib Camilla and I found at a thrift store. June's toys fit into one basket, her books into half a shelf. but when I laid her down the first night, her body relaxed in a way I'd never seen before. Like she knew this space had no exit signs behind her. Only beginnings. Camilla helped us move in. She carried the box labeled Notebooks Plus Naps with a kind of reverence. Set it down beside the second-hand bookshelf we assembled with mismatched screws and too much laughter. She paused at the entryway. "I could paint the porch if you want," she said. "Maybe yellow, something soft." I nodded. "Let's make it a color no one's ever slammed a door behind." She smiled, wider this time. We decorated slowly. Handprints on the fridge, a drawing of a lopsided cat, mine, and a pink dinosaur, June's, kind of. A quote pinned above the desk that read, "There is no such thing as too late, only right on time." One wall held framed pages from the blog's first print run. The other held photos, June laughing in a thrifted Halloween costume. Me, windblown, makeup-free, holding her in a field of wildflowers. Camilla, one eyebrow raised, coffee in hand, looking both unimpressed and totally home. There was no big reveal. No finally made it moment. Just cereal bowls in the sink and cartoons humming in the background. A baby reaching for a spoon. Me wiping oatmeal off the floor with one socked foot. But I remember standing in the hallway one afternoon, holding a laundry basket, hair in a claw clip, shirt stained with formula, and realizing, this is mine, not perfect, just free. That evening, June toddled into the hallway, squealing at nothing in particular. I picked her up and spun her in a slow circle. She laughed that breathless baby laugh that shakes the whole room. Camilla watched from the kitchen, her arms crossed, a quiet look in her eyes. I met her gaze. "Think she knows it's home?" I asked. Camilla tilted her head. "I think she knew before we did." Later, while June napped, I sat by the window with tea and wrote a new post. Sometimes home isn't a location. It's a chapter, and you don't move into it. You write your way there. I translated it and gave it a name. The leaves started falling in October. Big, rust-colored oak leaves scattered across the front lawn like reminders that even beautiful things let go. Camilla and I spent the morning sweeping them into soft little piles. June tried to eat one. We both pretended not to laugh until she spit it out like the drama queen she's becoming. That night, after June went down, we sat on the porch. Same porch Camilla painted soft yellow 2 months earlier. Same chipped step I always forget to fix. Same mug of tea. Same quiet, only something was different. Camilla handed me a folded piece of paper. Not a ring, not a speech, just paper. I opened it. It was written in that careful, upright handwriting she only used when she was nervous. At the top, "If you say no, I'll still make you coffee tomorrow." Then below, "I never planned on this. I only planned on showing up. But now I want to stay, not as a guest, not as a helper, but as yours. If you'll have me, I want to build something steady. I want to be the person June runs to when you've had a day. I want to be here when the fridge breaks, when the power goes out, when you forget where you put the car keys. I want to take care of you. Both of you, because you saved me too, Nat. You just don't know it yet. At the bottom, will you marry me?" I looked up. Camilla wasn't smiling. She wasn't performing. She just sat there, hands clasped between her knees, eyes like floodlights holding in the tide. "I don't need an answer now," she said quietly, but I already knew. Because something inside me, the part that had been locked out, shut down, rewritten by pain, that part had finally found someone who saw the full code and never once tried to debug me. I didn't cry. I just reached across the porch, took her hand, and said, "Yes, but not because I need saving, because I've already survived. And now I want to live, with you, as mine." We didn't kiss right away. We just sat there, fingers laced, tea going cold, and for once, nothing needed fixing, not the story, not me, not her, just us. Here, whole. Later that night, I posted the last entry to the blog. I started this journey wet, shivering, and unwanted on a porch I thought was home. Now, I'm saying yes on a porch we painted ourselves. June is safe, I'm seen, and the door behind me will never close against the people I love. Not ever again. If you've ever built love from pieces you weren't supposed to keep. If you've ever said yes when the world only taught you no. Tell me, what does your quiet future look like? Drop it in the comments if you're still building. We're building too.